So, good morning. We're 19 days into the Workbook of A Course in Miracles, and today the idea is much similar to yesterday's. Today's idea is I am not alone in experiencing the effects of my thoughts. Yesterday's was I am not alone in experiencing the effects of my seeing. And as he is going to tell us in this lesson, thinking and seeing are simultaneous, because thoughts are images that I make, and it's simultaneous. Our mind isn't time-bound in that sense. So the idea for today is obviously the reason why your seeing does not affect you alone. I am not alone in experiencing the effects of my thoughts. You will notice that at times the ideas related to thinking precede those related to perceiving, while other times the order is reversed. The reason is that the order doesn't matter. Thinking and its results are really simultaneous, for cause and effect are never apart, which is a very important theme, one of the main themes in the text as well, because if cause and effect are never apart, and we begin to understand and accept what true causation is, and we begin to accept the idea that there is but a single causation, and that causation is God, it would be the reason why we could never be separate from the mind of God, nor could we be separate from each other. If cause and effect are never separate, and God is our cause, and we are an effect of causation would be, in a totality, would be equally causative, yet it would still remain an effect. And as an effect, you would be endowed with the cause, with the causation of your Creator, but you would never leave. Thoughts don't leave their source. If thoughts don't leave their source to go out and be separate and discrete, then the fact that we are a thought in the causative mind of a single, whole, perfect, ever-creating, total and infinite God, then we're still one with our Creator. And that's a very important idea to begin to understand when we begin to heal our minds of the effects of separation, so that we can get below the preoccupation with the false effects, and begin to operate from the certainty and when I say certainty, I'm talking about experientially, of course, the reasonability of A Course in Miracles. And it is why it's a mind training. We're training our mind to think along a certain line. And the certain line stems from the fact that there's a single causation that you can't be separate from. You can't be separate from the cause of everything if you are part of that everything. And I assure you, you're part of that everything, always have been and always will be, and you will never be separate. So we're training the mind. The ego can learn. We can learn. We can train the ego to think along the lines of the text by utilizing the lessons of a workbook of A Course in Miracles, so that it no longer becomes prohibitive from our experiencing our reality. And that's what these lessons are attempting to do, to help us align our thinking, so that the alignment of our thinking, and as we align our thinking, we experience, in a sense, less and less willingness to give the resistance the time of day, actually, so that we don't have to let the resistance and our response to the resistance separate us from our cause, nor give us consternation on the path that we've chosen, in the recognition of the reunification of the sonship within the totality of God creating reality. And that's what these lessons are actually designed to bring about. Today, we are again emphasizing the fact that minds are joined. And I addressed this a little bit yesterday. This is rarely a wholly welcome idea at first, since it seems to carry with it an enormous sense of responsibility, and may even be regarded, as an invasion of privacy. Yet it is a fact that there are no private thoughts. Despite your initial resistance to the idea, you will yet understand that it must be true if salvation is possible at all, and salvation must be possible because it is the will of God. So, but I'm going to assure you that not only must it be possible, it's already accomplished, and that's one of the benefits of the total recognition that minds are joined. And we are not alone in experiencing the effects of my thoughts. We're not alone in experiencing the effects of any thinking anywhere. And that would include, we're not alone in experiencing the effects of the Christ mind of Jesus, who we are one with. And in Jesus' sojourn into the darkness of space and time, there's an event called the resurrection. And in the resurrection, we have the overcoming of death and the non-necessity for any of us to give way to the idea that death is the way out, when in fact death is really an impossibility. If you're eternal, whole, and perfect, it may be an attempt to get out of the dilemma of the world of space and time, and the inability that we all have to cope with it. I mean, make no mistake about it, no one has the ability to cope with the world of space and time. Although we develop coping abilities based on the need to control situations that we're in and control our life, the need to control our life is the inability to cope with it. Why would we have to cope with anything? If in fact life is eternal, life is whole, perfect, and infinitely love. There was something that I wanted to mention. What I wanted to mention was early on in Helen and Jesus' communication. Jesus makes a statement, and he says, man and mankind must begin to think of itself as both loving and lovable, as both lovable and loving. Because at the core of our being, and the entirety of our being, is the extension of the infinite and eternal love of God in his desire to share and extend that. And we are the sharing and the extending of love in the infinite, eternal mind of God. So in the center of our being, the cause of our reality, which this lesson is telling us we're not separate from. I am not alone in experiencing the effects of my thoughts, so I'm definitely not alone in my ability to experience the effects of God thinking, since I am God thinking, and and God shares His thought wholly with all of us. And it's at the level where we are all souls, let's use that term, where we are souls in the creative reality of an infinite and eternal loving God, where the communication really takes place. And it is also why we can share in the resurrection without having to go through the experience that, say, Jesus went through to prove that death is not real. Because that idea, when it's accomplished by one, is accomplished for all. If we choose, and at some point in time we must choose, if we choose to accept the reality of the resurrection, and I assure you, you have, and you did, and you will remember the time of your own resurrection, because minds are joined. Despite your initial resistance to this idea, you will understand that it must be true if salvation is possible, and salvation must be possible because it is the will of God. And in essence, since there in reality there is only the will of God, and it is only in illusions where we think there can be something opposite to the will of God, only in illusions can we resist God's love and seem to make a world unlike our reality, in which death is possible. I am not alone in experiencing the effects of my thoughts, and there seems to come with that a sense of responsibility, and we do have a responsibility for our own thinking. We've always been responsible for our own thinking, whether we've recognized it or not. I used to ask the question to people who I was involved with in these teaching and learning situations, and they would tell me a thought that isn't in your own mind. And in essence, while I got a lot of strange answers, it's not really possible for anyone to tell me a thought that isn't in their own mind. I once had a lawyer tell me that when we were in a discussion of the resurrection, he asked me a question. He said, "Do you mean if I believed as you believed, I would experience what you've experienced?" And I said, "Yes, most definitely." So he said, "That's impossible because I don't believe in Jesus." At which point I laughed, because the idea that he could tell me about something he doesn't believe in and name it is the fact that it's already in his mind, and our minds demand integrity, and everything, all of our thinking, will come into alignment with the whole and perfect mind of God, and will come into the certainty of being in communication with each other as that Christ mind, because we were all created to be one in that Christ mind. And despite the apparent fragmentation of that mind into these seemingly separate bodies, while the seemingly separate bodies aren't real, the fragmentation is merely a misrepresentation and misunderstanding of the fact that the kingdom of heaven is the sum total of all the souls that God has created, and you are one of those souls, whether you like the idea or not. So having no private thoughts, because the first thing that the ego does is go to all the things that it feels guilty about. So, oh no, If I have no private thoughts, then somebody somewhere must know what I'm thinking about blah blah blah. I'm not alone in experiencing the effects of this thought about my sexual relationships. I'm not alone in experiencing the effects of these thoughts about my hatred and desire to kill my neighbor. And at first, those may not be welcome. That all the universe is actually in on your thinking. But eventually, when we begin to recognize that our guilty thoughts don't have the ability to extend, they may multiply, they don't have the ability to extend, and since guilt in itself has no true causation and has no reality, it doesn't really have it may have a seeming effect in a dream of space and time, all of which is unreal, because there is no world. The world I see has nothing to do with reality. It is of my own making and does not exist. But the whole imperfect world and the universes that were created by God is truly what we are participating in the creation of, in spite of this momentary incursion where we're forgetting that's what we're doing. So I assure you, as a thought in the mind of God, you've never left your creative source, nor will you ever. And at any point in time, you can turn your mind to the recognition of that will, which is what this lesson is ultimately going to lead us to. If we're not separate, then at any point in time, we can turn our mind back and recognize the holy creative nature of it, and that's what we may call revelation. Yet in the healing of our mind, when we seem to not welcome this idea all at once, we seem to piece it out into piecemeal recognitions of the guilty thoughts. Now at first, when we think that we only have guilty thoughts because we feel an all-pervasive sense of guilt and fear, we also project that all-pervasive sense of fear and guilt onto our creative reality, so that's where we get the fear of God. But if God is love, and I assure you He is, and there is nothing but love, then that fear is unnecessary. And as we utilize these lessons to heal our mind of the effects of our false thinking, our less than true thinking, our thinking that has involved love lacks, we'll begin to see past the guilt and into the truth, simply because truth is true and nothing else is true. And ultimately, we all return to the recognition of our oneness with our Creator and each other, because that is our reality. And I assure you, you have passed this course at some point in space and time, because it was a required course. And we all get out of here alive. So you go forth and have a good day. I'll see some of you at 11 o'clock today. And we're going to kick around some ideas about special relationships. So you all have a good and grateful day. And I definitely will see you all on the other side of this hallucination, because on the other side of this hallucination, we have already seen all of ourselves as whole and perfect, and there is nothing but that. So you go ahead and have a good day, in spite of the futile attempt to resist the truth of this lesson and the initial experience of the fact that it may be an invasion of your privacy. Sooner or later, you're going to welcome the fact that you have no private thoughts, because that means God has no private thoughts, and the Christ mind has no private thoughts, and they're being shared with you every single moment of your seeming existence in the separation, where you've attempted to hide your own thinking from yourself. We've been guilty of our own thoughts for some strange reason, as if that they have control over us, and that is what we're attempting to reverse here, the reversal of effect and cause. So go forth and be whole and perfect.